Glad you're here. Tonight, we're talking about Hollow Knight and why it's become one of those games that just sticks with you long after you finished it. We'll explore the lore, the tragedy of Hallownest, and what makes this little bug's journey so special. So grab a blanket, get comfortable, and let's dive in. There's something deeply haunting about exploring a kingdom that's already dead. Not dying, not in its final moments, but long past the point of salvation. Hollow Knight drops you into Hallownest with almost no context, no grand introduction, no explanation of what happened here, or why everything feels so profoundly wrong. You're just a small creature with a nail, wandering into the depths of a fallen civilization, and the game trusts you to piece together the tragedy yourself. This approach to storytelling, this willingness to let players sit in confusion and slowly unravel the mystery through environmental details, item descriptions, and cryptic NPC dialogue, is part of what makes Hollow Knight special. But it's more than just the method of storytelling. It's the story itself, a tale of sacrifice and duty and the terrible cost of trying to contain something that cannot be contained. Hallownest wasn't always a corpse of a kingdom. There was a time when it thrived, when its citizens went about their lives in the gleaming capital, when the trams ran and the stagways connected distant lands, when culture and art flourished under the rule of the Pale King. But that feels like ancient history by the time you arrive. The game opens with your character, the knight, descending into the town of Dirtmouth, a settlement that sits above the ruins like a gravestone marking where something important used to be. The few NPCs you meet here speak in vague terms about the kingdom below, about the infection that destroyed it, about how no one who goes down there ever comes back. And yet down you go anyway, because that's what the game is about at its core. Descending into darkness, both literal and metaphorical, to understand what went wrong and whether anything can be made right again. The first area you explore, the Forgotten Crossroads, sets the tone perfectly. It's a network of caverns and passages that once served as the highway system of Hallownest, connecting different regions and allowing citizens to travel freely. Now it's abandoned, filled with infected creatures that attack on sight, their eyes glowing orange with the sickness that consumed the kingdom. The architecture tells you this place mattered once. There are careful stonework and lampposts and benches, signs of a civilization that built things to last. But nature and infection have reclaimed it all. Vines grow through cracks in the walls. Water drips from ceilings. The only sounds are your footsteps and the distant cries of infected bugs. It's melancholic in a way that few games achieve, this sense that you're walking through the ruins of something that was genuinely worth saving. As you explore deeper, you start finding fragments of Hallownest's history. A statue here, a memorial tablet there, the corpse of a bug clutching a journal with its final thoughts. The game never stops to explain these things to you directly. There's no codex you can open to read about the lore in organized fashion. Instead, you have to actively engage with the world, talk to every NPC multiple times, read every item description, explore every corner to find the hidden rooms where the most important pieces of the puzzle are kept. This makes the act of understanding Hallownest's fall feel earned. You're not being told a story, you're uncovering it, archaeologist style, piecing together fragments until the bigger picture emerges. And that picture is tragic in ways that become more apparent the more you learn. The Pale King is the figure at the center of Hallownest's tragedy. He's presented almost as a deity, a higher being who arrived in this land and transformed it from a simple collection of bug tribes into a unified kingdom. The citizens of Hallownest worshipped him, built monuments to him, followed his rule without question. He brought light to the darkness, quite literally, as his power was associated with pale white light that drove back the void and gave bugs true sentience and will. Before the Pale King, the bugs of this land lived under the rule of other higher beings, like the Radiance, existing more as extensions of a hive mind than as individuals. The Pale King changed that, offering them independence of thought and the ability to forge their own destinies. In return, they gave him their loyalty and built a civilization in his name.
But the Pale King made a critical mistake, and it's a mistake born from what might have been good intentions. The Radiance, the moth goddess who once ruled over the bugs of this land, didn't take kindly to being forgotten. As the Pale King's influence grew and more bugs abandoned their worship of her to serve the new king, the Radiance grew angry. She began appearing in the dreams of Hallownest's citizens, a bright burning light that promised a return to unity, to purpose, to the old ways. But her presence in their minds did something to the bugs. It infected them, turned them violent and mindless, drove them to attack anyone who wasn't infected. This was the infection that would eventually destroy Hallownest, a plague of angry light that spread through dreams and could not be fought with conventional weapons. The Pale King, for all his power and intelligence, could not destroy the Radiance. She existed in the dream realm, beyond his reach, and as long as bugs remembered her, she could infect their minds. So he came up with a different solution, one that speaks to both his desperation and his willingness to sacrifice anything to save his kingdom. He would create a vessel, a being with no mind to be infected, no will to break, no voice to cry suffering. This hollow vessel would be used to contain the Radiance, to lock her away inside an empty shell where she could rage forever without being able to spread her infection. It's a brilliant solution in theory, cold and logical, and perfectly fitting for a king whose whole identity was built on bringing order through control. But the execution of this plan required something unthinkable. To create a truly hollow vessel, the Pale King needed beings born of void, that strange, dark substance that exists as the opposite of light and thought and will. So he went to the abyss, the deepest, darkest place in all of Hallownest, and there he conducted his experiment. Using his own power, combined with the void, and working with the White Lady, his queen, the Pale King created vessels. Thousands of them. Small bug-like creatures born from eggs, each one a potential container for the Radiance. But here's the horrifying part that the game reveals slowly through environmental storytelling and the haunting imagery of the abyss. Most of these vessels weren't hollow enough. They had thoughts, wills, desires. They were imperfect, and imperfect vessels were useless for the Pale King's purpose. When you descend into the abyss late in the game, you see the evidence of what happened. The ground is literally made of shell fragments, the corpses of thousands of failed vessels who were discarded, left to die in the darkness because they weren't empty enough. The game doesn't show you this happening. It doesn't need to. The visual of that sea of dead children, because that's what they are, the Pale King's offspring, is enough to communicate the depths of his crime. He committed infanticide on a massive scale, all in the name of saving his kingdom. And from that pile of corpses, he chose one vessel that seemed truly hollow, that showed no signs of thought or feeling, that appeared to be nothing more than an animated shell. This vessel was brought up from the abyss, trained in the ways of combat, and eventually used to seal the Radiance away. The plan worked, for a time. The Hollow Knight, as this chosen vessel came to be known, was chained in the Temple of the Black Egg and sealed inside by 3 dreamers who gave up their lives to maintain the seal. The infection stopped spreading. Hallownest was saved. The Pale King had succeeded where others failed, containing an unkillable god through sheer force of will and terrible sacrifice. But there was a problem, one that the Pale King either didn't foresee or chose to ignore. The vessel he chose wasn't actually hollow. It had thoughts, feelings, a sense of duty and love for its father. And those feelings created cracks in the seal. Over time, the Radiance began to leak out, her influence seeping through the imperfect vessel and spreading infection once more through Hallownest. By the time you arrive as the Knight, the kingdom has been abandoned for so long that most people don't even remember it existed. The infection has returned stronger than ever, and the Hollow Knight is failing in its duty through no fault of its own. This is where Hollow Knight's story becomes truly special, because it's not just about the fall of a kingdom. It's about the cost of trying to fix problems through control and sacrifice rather than addressing their root causes. The Pale King's entire approach to the Radiance problem was to suppress her, to lock her away and hope that would be enough. He never considered that maybe the solution was to actually deal with why she was angry in the first place. His citizens had forgotten her, erased her from history, denied her the worship she once received. Her infection was born from that rejection, from being cast aside and replaced. But instead of acknowledging that pain or finding a way to coexist with her, the Pale King chose violence. He chose to create a prison made of his own child and hoped that would solve everything.
The game draws clear parallels between the Pale King's methods and the very thing he was fighting against. The Radiance controlled bugs through a hive mind, removing their individuality in service of unity. The Pale King gave bugs individuality, but demanded absolute loyalty in return. And when his plan required sacrifice, he didn't hesitate to murder his own children. Both are forms of control, just with different aesthetics. One is warm light and forced unity, the other is cold logic and forced duty. Neither actually respect the autonomy of the bugs caught between them. This moral ambiguity is part of what makes the story so compelling. There are no clear heroes in Hallownest's fall, only flawed beings making terrible choices that seemed necessary at the time. Your character, the Knight, is another one of those discarded vessels. You crawled out of the abyss somehow, survived when thousands of your siblings didn't, and wandered away from Hallownest into the wasteland beyond. The game never explicitly states why you return. There's no dialogue from the Knight explaining their motivations, because the Knight, being a vessel, has no voice. But the game suggests through environmental clues and NPC interactions that you're drawn back by something, perhaps a sense of purpose, perhaps the call of the void, perhaps simply because you're empty enough that you can succeed where the Hollow Knight failed. Whatever the reason, your return sets in motion the events that will determine Hallownest's final fate. The beauty of Hollow Knight's narrative structure is that it gives you agency in deciding what that fate should be. Unlike many games where the story is predetermined and you're just along for the ride, Hollow Knight offers multiple endings based on your actions and how thoroughly you explore. The simplest ending has you defeating the Hollow Knight and taking its place as the new seal for the Radiance. It's a somber ending, with your character accepting the same fate as their sibling, chained and sealed away to suffer for eternity, holding back a god. The game doesn't present this as triumphant. The music is mournful, and Hornet, one of the few characters who seems to understand what's happening, bows her head in respect or sadness as the new seal takes hold. You've saved Hallownest, technically, but at the cost of your own freedom, and the game makes it clear this is just a temporary solution. Eventually, this seal will fail too, just like the last one. But there are other endings, darker and more complete. If you collect enough Void Essence and unite the Void under your control, you can challenge the Radiance directly in the Dream Realm. This leads to a battle that takes place inside the Hollow Knight's mind, literally inside the prison where the Radiance has been trapped and leaking out. You fight through manifestations of infection and memory until you face the goddess herself, a being of pure light and fury. And if you succeed, if you manage to defeat her, the void consumes her completely. The infection ends, not because it's sealed away, but because the source is destroyed. Hallownest is truly freed, though by this point there's barely anyone left alive to appreciate that freedom. There's also the Embrace the Void ending, which might be the bleakest of all. After defeating the Radiance, instead of the normal conclusion, the Knight becomes one with the Void entirely, shattering into shadow and ceasing to exist as an individual. The game implies that the Knight's purpose is fulfilled, that they were always meant to be nothing more than a tool to end the infection, and once that's done, there's no reason for them to continue existing. It's a haunting finale that reinforces the game's themes about duty and sacrifice. The Knight succeeds where the Hollow Knight failed, not because they were stronger or more skilled, but because they truly were hollow. They had nothing to live for, no attachments, no desires beyond completing the task. And that emptiness, that void at their core, is what allowed them to end a god. There's the Godmaster endings, which open up an entirely different philosophical question. Through the God Home area, you can challenge yourself against increasingly difficult boss rush modes, eventually fighting every boss in the game back to back. This culminates in battles against the pure forms of various characters, and ultimately against the Radiance herself in her absolute prime. But the most interesting part is the choice at the very end, when you're given the option to either destroy the Radiance and save Hallownest, or embrace the void and potentially destroy everything. Choosing the latter leads to an ending where the void breaks free of its containment and spreads across the world, consuming everything in darkness. It's left ambiguous whether this is good or bad, whether the void is simply another form of destruction like the infection, or whether it represents a natural reset that will allow something new to grow.
What makes these multiple endings work is that they all feel thematically consistent. Hollow Knight is a game about cycles, about how attempts to control natural forces inevitably fail, about how sacrifice in service of duty can be both noble and tragic. Every ending reinforces these ideas in different ways. You can perpetuate the cycle by becoming the new seal. You can break the cycle by destroying the Radiance, or you can embrace the void and let everything end. None of these feel like the objectively correct choice, because the game isn't interested in providing easy answers. It's interested in exploring the consequences of the choices that have already been made and letting you decide how the story should conclude. The characters you meet throughout your journey add depth and humanity to what could have been a bleak and impersonal story. Quirrel is perhaps the most beloved of these characters, a wandering scholar with a mysterious past who shows up in various locations around Hallownest. He's always friendly, always curious, marveling at the history and architecture of places he doesn't quite remember, but feels drawn to nonetheless. As you progress, you learn that Quirrel was the assistant to Monomon the teacher, one of the 3 dreamers who sealed themselves away to maintain the Hollow Knight's prison. His memories were sealed along with his master, leaving him to wander without purpose until he found his way back to Hallownest. After you defeat Monomon and break her seal, Quirrel regains his memories and his sense of purpose. But there's a sadness to it. He remembers what he lost, what Hallownest used to be, and he has to reconcile that with the ruins that remain. The final time you can find Quirrel is sitting by the blue lake, staring out at the water. If you sit next to him, he'll talk about how peaceful it is, how he's content to finally rest after so much traveling. The game never shows you what happens to him after this, but his nail can be found stabbed into the ground by the lake later, implying that he walked into the water and chose to end his journey there. It's a subtle, heartbreaking conclusion to his arc. Quirrel didn't die fighting or from infection. He simply decided he was done, that he'd seen what he needed to see and done what he needed to do, and he chose peace on his own terms. The game doesn't make a big deal of this. There's no cutscene, no dramatic music. Quirrel is just gone, and you're left to interpret what that means. Hornet is another crucial character, and her relationship to the knight is complicated and fascinating. She's the daughter of the Pale King and Hera the Beast, one of the 3 dreamers, born from a bargain between them. Hera agreed to become a dreamer and maintain the seal only if the Pale King gave her a child, ensuring her tribe would have an heir. So Hornet is the knight's half-sister. Though she's not a vessel, she has a mind, a will, a voice. She's everything the vessels were specifically designed not to be. Throughout the game, she tests you, fights you twice to see if you're capable of doing what needs to be done. She's not antagonistic exactly, more like she's trying to determine whether you're strong enough to succeed where others failed, or whether you're just another hollow thing that will break under pressure. Her dialogue is cryptic but revealing. She calls you ghost, little shadow, sibling, depending on the context. She seems to understand what you are and what you might be capable of, but she's also cautious, even fearful. In the ending where you take the Hollow Knight's place, her reaction suggests she knows this isn't a real solution, that the cycle is just continuing with a different vessel. But in the endings where you defeat the Radiance, where you actually break the cycle, her reaction is different. There's respect there, maybe even hope. The Silksong game, which follows Hornet as the protagonist, suggests she survives the events of Hollow Knight and continues on to her own journey. But in the context of this game, she's a witness to whether Hallownest can truly be saved or if it's doomed to repeat its mistakes forever. Elderbug, the old bug you meet in Dirtmouth at the very beginning, represents the game's heart in a strange way. He's not important to the plot. He doesn't give you crucial items or unlock new abilities. He's just a tired old bug who's watched everyone leave Dirtmouth one by one as they gave up on the town and the kingdom below. He's lonely and sad, and tries to warn you not to go down into Hallownest because no one ever comes back. But as you progress and keep returning to Dirtmouth, he starts to have hope again. He's happy to see you, surprised you're still alive, grateful for the company. If you defeat the Radiance and save Hallownest, Elderbug's dialogue changes to reflect that something has lifted, that the oppressive feeling hanging over everything has finally eased. He doesn't know what you did or how you did it, but he knows something changed for the better, and he's thankful.
These small character moments are what give Hollow Knight its emotional weight. The grand story of gods and kingdoms and infection is compelling, but it's the personal stories of individuals trying to survive and find meaning in the ruins that make you care. Cloth, the warrior who wants to die a glorious death in battle and eventually gets her wish protecting you. Myla, the cheerful mining bug who slowly succumbs to infection as you progress, her song becoming distorted until she attacks you mindlessly. Tisso, the overconfident fighter who goes to challenge the Coliseum of Fools and dies off-screen, his body found broken in a corner later. These aren't main characters. Most players might miss some of them entirely, but they populate Hallownest with life and death and tragedy, making the world feel real. The Grimm Troop DLC adds another layer to the game's exploration of cycles and purpose. The troop is a traveling circus of sorts, appearing in kingdoms to perform a ritual that involves gathering flame and feeding it to Grimchild, allowing the nightmare heart to sustain itself. Grimm the Ringmaster is unfailingly polite and theatrical, but there's something unsettling about him and his troop. They're not malicious exactly, but they're also not really alive in a traditional sense. They're manifestations of the nightmare heart, playing out roles in an eternal cycle. You can choose to complete the ritual, allowing the troop to continue their cycle, or you can banish them with Brum's help, ending their presence in Hallownest, but also ending Grimchild's transformation. What's interesting about this DLC is how it mirrors the main game's themes. The Grimm Troop ritual is another cycle, another pattern that repeats endlessly because that's what it's designed to do. Grimm himself seems aware of this, even tired of it perhaps, but he plays his role anyway, because that's what he is. Choosing to complete the ritual means accepting that some cycles can't or shouldn't be broken, that there's value in traditions even if they're strange and uncomfortable. Choosing to banish the troop means asserting that you have the right to break cycles, to deny things their nature, if you believe that's the right choice. Neither option is presented as correct, which is very Hollow Knight. The game gives you the choice and lets you sit with the consequences. The Godmaster DLC takes a different approach, focusing almost entirely on challenge and self-improvement. Godhome is a realm where you can fight perfected versions of every boss, testing your skills against increasingly difficult combinations. The philosophical question here is about the nature of godhood and worship. The bugs in Godhome worship strength, believe that the gods are simply the most powerful beings, and that by defeating gods, you can become one yourself. It's a very different worldview from the main game's focus on duty and sacrifice. Here, power is what matters, and proving yourself through combat is the path to enlightenment, or divinity, or whatever you want to call it. But the endings of Godmaster complicate this. After proving yourself against every challenge, after defeating the absolute Radiance in her most powerful form, you're faced with the choice of what to do with all that power. You can use it to save Hallownest, finally destroying the infection for good. Or you can let the void consume everything, including yourself, ending all cycles, not through control, but through oblivion. The fact that the game presents becoming one with the void as a legitimate choice, possibly even the true ending, depending on how you interpret it, says something profound about Hollow Knight's philosophy. Maybe the answer isn't to control or contain or defeat. Maybe the answer is to accept that some things should end, that not everything needs to be saved, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let something die peacefully rather than prolonging its suffering.
The world design of Hollow Knight reinforces its themes through environmental storytelling. Every area you explore tells you something about Hallownest's past and what went wrong. The City of Tears is a beautiful, melancholic place, a grand capital with constant rain falling from an unknown source. The architecture is stunning, with towers and statues and fountains, clear evidence of a sophisticated civilization. But it's also empty and decaying, with most of its citizens either dead or infected. The Watcher's Spire stands as a monument to the bugs who defended the city, and you can find their corpses still at their posts, killed by infection while trying to maintain order. It's a powerful image, these loyal guards who stood their ground even as everything fell apart around them. Deepnest is probably the most unsettling area in the game, a web-filled cavern system inhabited by spiders and other predatory bugs. It's dark, claustrophobic, filled with enemies that can kill you quickly if you're not careful. But it's also where Hera the Beast, one of the Dreamers, made her home. The Weavers, the spider tribe that lived here, were powerful and dangerous, but they also had culture and purpose. Many of them left Hallownest before the infection took hold, following their instincts that told them something was wrong. The ones that stayed either died or became infected, leaving Deepnest as a tomb for an entire civilization. Finding Hera's den and seeing her sleeping form, knowing she chose to seal herself away to protect a kingdom that wasn't even really hers, adds tragic weight to an already oppressive area. The ancient basin and the abyss below it are where the game's darkest secrets are kept. The basin is where the Pale King conducted his experiments, where he tried to harness the void to create his vessels. The architecture here is different from the rest of Hallownest, more angular and stark, built for function rather than beauty. And below it, the abyss waits, a pit of darkness so deep and primal that even the infection can't reach it. Descending into the abyss is one of the game's most powerful moments. The darkness is almost total, broken only by your Lumafly lantern and the occasional glowing eyes of things watching from the shadows. And then you see them, the corpses of your siblings, thousands of discarded vessels piled up like trash. The game forces you to walk across that pile, to literally step on the bodies of beings just like you who weren't good enough for the Pale King's plan. At the very bottom of the abyss, you can find the birthplace, a dark hollow where the vessels were created. There's a sense of profound wrongness here, like you're seeing something that should have remained hidden. The void itself seems to recognize you as you approach, tendrils of shadow reaching out and then pulling back. And if you have the Void Heart charm, the culmination of uniting the void under your will, the shade creatures in the abyss stop attacking you.
They recognize you as one of them, perhaps even as their leader or representative. It's a small detail, but it speaks to the game's attention to making you feel connected to this world and its history. You're not just exploring random dungeons, you're walking through your own past, uncovering the circumstances of your birth and the terrible purpose you were created for. The White Palace, accessed through a hidden dream sequence, is where you learn the most about the Pale King as a person rather than as a historical figure. The palace itself is pristine white, filled with deadly buzzsaws and spikes, a platforming gauntlet that tests your skills to their absolute limit. The Path of Pain, an optional challenge within the White Palace, is considered one of the hardest sections in the entire game. But the difficulty serves a thematic purpose. The Pale King was obsessed with perfection, with creating something that could withstand any trial. The palace reflects that obsession, built not for comfort or beauty, but as a test of worthiness. Only something truly hollow, truly focused, could navigate these halls without failing. At the very end of the White Palace, you find the Pale King's throne room, and there he is, the king himself, dead and impaled on his own throne. The game never explains how he died or when, leaving it as another mystery for players to puzzle over. Some believe he killed himself out of guilt for what he did to his children. Others think he simply faded away as Hallownest fell, his purpose fulfilled and his power spent. Whatever the truth, seeing the Pale King's corpse, this figure who loomed so large over the entire story, reduced to a small, dead thing on a throne, is a powerful moment. All his planning, all his sacrifice, all the terrible things he did to save his kingdom, and he still failed. He still died in a palace filled with his regrets, leaving behind a world that fell apart anyway.
The music in Hollow Knight deserves special mention because it's integral to the game's emotional impact. Christopher Larkin's soundtrack is hauntingly beautiful, using simple piano melodies and ambient sounds to create atmosphere that matches each area perfectly. The City of Tears theme is melancholic and gentle, reflecting the constant rain and faded grandeur of the capital. The Dirtmouth theme is lonely but hopeful, a single instrument playing a simple melody that feels like the last voice in an empty town. The Radiance's battle theme is frantic and intense, all harsh strings and discordant notes that communicate her fury and desperation. But it's the quieter moments where the music really shines. Resting at benches is accompanied by soft ambient sounds, letting you breathe and feel safe for a moment. The music that plays when you're exploring peaceful areas, like the resting grounds, is contemplative, encouraging you to slow down and observe rather than rush through. And the complete silence in certain areas, like parts of the Abyss or Deep Nest, creates tension and unease more effectively than any amount of scary music could. The soundtrack understands that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is pull back and let the environment speak for itself. The art style is another crucial element of Hollow Knight's success. The hand-drawn character designs and environments give the game a distinctive look that sets it apart from other Metroidvanias. Everything is bug-themed, but not in a gross or off-putting way.
The characters are cute in their own strange way, with simple designs that still convey personality and emotion. The environments are detailed and atmospheric, using color and lighting to create mood. The forgotten crossroads are earthy browns and greens, feeling almost pleasant until the infection spreads and turns everything orange and aggressive. Green Path is lush and vibrant, full of plant life and water, a stark contrast to the dead stone of other areas. The color palette shifts dramatically as you explore, helping each area feel distinct and memorable. The animation work is similarly impressive. Every enemy has unique movement patterns and attack animations that make them feel alive rather than like simple obstacles. The knight's movement is fluid and responsive, making the platforming feel good, even when it's brutally difficult. Boss fights are spectacles of animation, with massive enemies moving in complex patterns that you have to learn and adapt to. And the little details, like how the knight's cloak flutters when you dash, or how they shake off water after swimming, add personality to a character who never speaks and whose face is just a blank mask. The game's difficulty is part of its identity and ties into its themes about perseverance and sacrifice. Hollow Knight is hard, not in a cheap or unfair way, but in a way that demands you learn and improve. Bosses have complex patterns that will kill you repeatedly until you understand them. Platforming sections require precise timing and control. You will die frequently, and each death sends you back to the last bench you rested at, forcing you to recover your shade to regain your geocurrency and soul meter. This creates real stakes for exploration and combat. Death has consequences, even if those consequences are just frustration and lost time. But the difficulty also makes success feel earned. When you finally beat a boss that's been destroying you for an hour, the sense of accomplishment is genuine. When you make it through a difficult platforming section without falling, you feel skilled rather than lucky. The game respects you enough to challenge you, trusting that you'll rise to meet that challenge rather than giving up. And thematically, this mirrors the knight's journey. You're trying to succeed where others failed, attempting something that seems impossible, persevering through countless deaths, because that's what vessels do. They fulfill their purpose, no matter the cost.
The community around Hollow Knight has created a wealth of theories and interpretations about the game's lore, and the developers at Team Cherry have encouraged this by leaving so much deliberately ambiguous. Is the knight truly hollow, or do they have thoughts and feelings they simply can't express? Is the Pale King a tragic figure who did terrible things for good reasons, or a tyrant whose pride destroyed his kingdom? Did Quirrel die at the Blue Lake, or did he simply leave his nail behind as a symbol that his journey was complete? Is the Void evil, neutral, or something beyond human understanding? These questions don't have definitive answers, and that's intentional. The game gives you the pieces and trusts you to assemble them into whatever picture makes sense to you. This approach to storytelling respects the intelligence of the player in a way that many games don't. It assumes you're paying attention, that you care enough to think about what you're seeing and experiencing, that you can handle ambiguity and interpret symbolism. It's a game that rewards close reading and careful observation, where the most important story moments often happen in the background or in optional areas you might never find. You can finish Hollow Knight having experienced only the surface-level story and still have a satisfying experience. But if you dig deeper, if you explore every corner and talk to every NPC and think about what it all means, you'll find layers of meaning and tragedy that make the story so much richer. The fact that Hollow Knight was created by a small indie team makes its achievement even more remarkable. Team Cherry, originally just 3 people, created a game that rivals or exceeds the quality of titles made by studios with hundreds of employees and massive budgets. The scope and ambition of Hollow Knight, the sheer amount of content and polish and attention to detail is staggering when you consider the team size. It's a testament to what passionate creators can accomplish when they refuse to compromise their vision, when they take the time to do things right rather than rushing to meet arbitrary deadlines. The game's development took several years, with the team constantly refining and expanding based on feedback from Kickstarter backers and early access players. Content that was originally planned as DLC got incorporated into the base game for free. Areas were redesigned multiple times to improve flow and challenge. Boss fights were tuned endlessly to find the right difficulty curve. This dedication to craft shows in every aspect of the final product. Hollow Knight feels complete in a way that many games don't, like every element was carefully considered and placed with intention. The legacy of Hollow Knight extends beyond just the game itself. It's inspired countless indie developers to be more ambitious with their projects, to trust that audiences will appreciate depth and challenge and thoughtful design. It's proven that Metroidvanias, a genre that many considered played out, still have room for innovation and artistic expression. It's shown that you don't need a massive marketing budget or a well-known IP to create something that resonates with millions of players. The success of Hollow Knight is a success for independent game development as a whole, demonstrating that quality and vision can triumph over corporate calculation. Looking at Hollow Knight as a complete work, what emerges is a game that uses every tool available to it: gameplay, art, music, environmental storytelling, cryptic dialogue, to create a cohesive meditation on duty, sacrifice, and the cost of trying to control forces beyond our understanding. It's a tragedy in the classical sense, where the downfall of the characters is inevitable from the start, but no less affecting for being expected. The Pale King's hubris, his belief that he could solve any problem through control and sacrifice, directly causes the destruction of everything he built. The Radiance's inability to let go of worship and her need for revenge leads her to becoming the very thing she sought to destroy, a force of mindless violence. The Hollow Knight's failure isn't a moral failure, but an inevitable result of being given an impossible task based on a flawed premise. And into this mess of gods and kings and ancient grudges walks the knight, the smallest and most insignificant piece on the board, and somehow you're the one who gets to decide how it ends. You can perpetuate the cycle, break it, or burn it all down and let something new grow from the ashes. The game gives you that power, while also making it clear that there are no perfect solutions, that every choice has costs, that ending suffering might require sacrifices that seem cruel or unjust. It doesn't preach at you or tell you what to think. It presents a situation, shows you the consequences of past actions, and lets you make your own decisions about what should happen next. This is why Hollow Knight is a masterpiece. Not because it's perfect in every technical aspect, though it comes remarkably close. Not because it tells a story that everyone will love, though many do, but because it respects you as a player and as a thinker. Because it trusts you to engage with difficult themes and complex narratives. Because it believes you're capable of finding meaning in ambiguity rather than needing everything spelled out. The game treats you like an adult who can handle tragedy and moral complexity, and in return, it delivers an experience that stays with you long after the credits roll. There's a reason people obsess over Hollow Knight's lore, creating elaborate theories and detailed timelines and passionate debates about character motivations. The game invites that kind of engagement by being generous with mystery and stingy with answers. It creates a world that feels like it existed before you arrived and will continue existing after you leave, even though we know it's all carefully constructed fiction. That sense of a living, breathing world with its own history and logic is incredibly rare in games, and Hollow Knight achieves it through meticulous attention to detail and unwavering commitment to its vision. Every charm you find has lore implications. Every enemy you encounter fits into the ecosystem. Every area you explore tells part of the larger story. Nothing feels random or arbitrary. The Mantis Lords guard Deep Nest because that's their ancient duty, protecting the kingdom from the predators below, in exchange for being left alone to govern themselves. The Soul Sanctum exists because bugs tried to use soul magic to cure the infection and ended up creating something worse. The Coliseum of Fools operates because some bugs would rather die fighting for glory than slowly succumb to infection. Everything connects, everything matters, everything adds another layer to your understanding of what Hallownest was and why it fell. The creatures you fight aren't just obstacles, they're victims of the infection, former citizens of Hallownest transformed into mindless husks. When you see the Moss Knights in Greenpath, you're fighting guards who once protected that area. The Husk Guards in the City of Tears were once elite soldiers. Even the weak enemies in the Forgotten Crossroads were once bugs going about their daily lives. The infection didn't discriminate. It took everyone, from the lowest worker to the highest noble, and turned them into the same shambling, aggressive things. The tragedy isn't just that Hallownest fell. It's that everyone who lived there lost themselves before they died. This makes your journey through Hallownest feel less like a hero's quest and more like walking through a mass grave. You're not saving people because there's no one to save. You're ending their suffering, putting down infected creatures that can't be cured, and trying to prevent this tragedy from spreading beyond Hallownest's borders. It's mercy killing on a kingdom-wide scale, and the game never lets you feel good about it. There's no triumphant music when you clear an area. There's just silence and the knowledge that you've killed what used to be someone's friend, someone's family, someone who mattered to somebody else.
The vessels are perhaps the most tragic element of the entire story because they represent innocence destroyed in service of a goal they never understood. They didn't ask to be created. They didn't choose their purpose. They were born into suffering and discarded when they failed to meet impossible standards. The Hollow Knight itself, the one that was chosen as worthy, spent its entire existence chained in darkness, holding back a god. It was never given a choice. It was created to suffer, and it fulfilled that purpose until it couldn't anymore. And the worst part is that it failed, not because it was weak or incompetent, but because it loved its father.
That bond, that attachment, that tiny crack in its hollow shell was enough to doom everything. When you fight the Hollow Knight in the Black Egg Temple, you're not fighting a villain. You're fighting a sibling who's been tortured for decades, who's failing at the one task it was created for, who's desperately trying to hold on just a little longer, even though it's clearly in agony. The fight is heartbreaking because the Hollow Knight stabs itself repeatedly, trying to maintain the seal, even as you're trying to end its suffering. It can't let go of its duty, even when that duty is killing it. And if Hornet is there, if you've earned the right to dream nail the Hollow Knight and fight the Radiance directly, she holds the Hollow Knight down, stops it from stabbing itself, forces it to accept help, even though every instinct it has is screaming to continue suffering in silence. The Radiance herself is interesting because she's not evil in any traditional sense. She's a god who was forgotten, whose worshippers abandoned her for a new king with prettier promises. Her anger is understandable, even if her methods are monstrous. She didn't start the conflict. The Pale King did, by offering bugs something they couldn't refuse, individuality and free will, knowing full well it would mean the end of the Radiance's influence. He committed cultural genocide against the Moth tribe, erasing her goddess from history and replacing her with himself. The Radiance's infection is her attempt to make bugs remember her, to force them to acknowledge she exists, to prove she still matters. It's the rage of a god who's been made obsolete, and while that doesn't justify the destruction she causes, it makes her more than just a mindless force of evil. The moths themselves are barely present in the game, and that's intentional. They're a dying tribe, their culture mostly erased, their goddess sealed away. The seer in the resting grounds is one of the last, and she's ancient and sad, clinging to memories of a time when her people mattered. She helps you collect essence and eventually gives you the dream nail's true power, but there's resignation in her words. She knows the moths are done. Even if you defeat the Radiance and end the infection, it won't bring back her tribe or restore what was lost. The Pale King won that war completely, and the infection was just the Radiance's death throes taking the kingdom down with her. This is the kind of layered storytelling that makes Hollow Knight special. Every faction, every character, every conflict has understandable motivations, even when their actions are terrible. The Pale King wasn't a monster. He was a king trying to save his kingdom with the tools available to him, even though those tools required horrific sacrifices. The Radiance wasn't evil. She was a forgotten god fighting for survival and relevance in a world that had moved past her. The Hollow Knight wasn't a failure. It was given an impossible task and did its best with what it had. Even the infection itself isn't purely bad. It's just the Radiance's nature expressed through desperate anger.
The game's refusal to have clear heroes and villains makes it feel more real and more tragic. Real conflicts don't usually have obvious good and bad sides. They have people making choices based on their values and circumstances, and those choices having consequences that ripple outward in ways no one could predict. The Pale King creating the vessels seemed like a brilliant solution until it wasn't. The dreamers sacrificing themselves to maintain the seal seemed noble until you realize it just delayed the inevitable. Every choice made sense at the time to the people making it, and that's what makes their collective failure so devastating. The minor NPCs scattered throughout Hallownest add texture to this world and remind you that life existed here once beyond just the major players.
Lem, the relic dealer in the City of Tears, is obsessed with preserving Hallownest's history through artifacts. He doesn't care about the infection or the radiance or any of the big picture stuff. He just wants to collect and catalog and remember. Cornifer and Iselda, the mapmaker and his wife, represent a functional relationship in a world full of dysfunction. They care about each other, support each other's passions, and continue living their lives despite everything falling apart around them. Salubra, the charm collector, just wants to gather charms and sell them, taking joy in her collection even though the kingdom she lives in is dead. These characters don't have major story importance, but they make Hallownest feel lived in. They prove that not everyone was consumed by the great conflicts between kings and gods. Some bugs just wanted to live their lives, pursue their interests, love their families. The fact that most of them died or disappeared or went mad from infection doesn't erase that they existed and mattered. The game takes time to show you these small personal stories alongside the grand tragedy, and it's richer for it. You're not just saving a concept or an idea. You're potentially saving what remains of a culture, a history, countless small stories that deserve to be remembered. The Hunter is a particularly interesting minor character. He's a predator who lives to hunt and tasks you with hunting down every creature in Hallownest and recording them in the Hunter's journal. His entries for each creature mix practical hunting advice with observations about their behavior and occasional philosophical musings. He's fascinated by the infection, by how it changes creatures and makes them more aggressive. But he's also lonely, the last of his kind, passing time by hunting and recording because there's nothing else left for him to do. His final journal entry, when you've hunted every creature, is bittersweet. He acknowledges you as a worthy hunter, maybe even his equal, and then just disappears. He served his purpose, taught you everything he could, and moved on. The dream bosses add another layer of tragedy to the story. These are the lingering memories and dreams of dead characters fought in the dream realm where their ideal selves still exist. Veiled Champion is the dream of the false knight, a maggot who stole armor to seem strong, still convinced he can protect his siblings. Lost Kin is one of your vessel siblings, infected in death, forever trapped in that moment of being consumed by the Radiance's light. Soul Tyrant is the delusional king of the Soul Sanctum, still believing his experiments will save Hallownest. These aren't just harder versions of regular bosses, they're manifestations of who these characters wanted to be or feared becoming, their essence crystallized in dream form. Fighting these dream bosses forces you to confront the full tragedy of their existence. The false knight was just trying to protect his family using the only method he could think of. The Lost Kin was one of your vessel siblings, infected in death, forever trapped in that moment of being consumed by the Radiance's light. Soul Tyrant thought he was solving the infection problem, and in his dreams, he's still convinced he's the hero. Everyone thought they were doing the right thing, and everyone was wrong in ways that got them killed. The dream realm preserves these final moments of hope or delusion or pride, letting you experience who they were beyond just being obstacles in your path.
The White Defender, Dung Defender's dream version, is particularly poignant. In reality, the Dung Defender is a tragic figure, an elite warrior of Hallownest who survived the fall and now guards the sewers out of loyalty to a kingdom that doesn't exist anymore. But in his dreams, he's still the White Defender, proud and strong,
protecting his king and his kingdom at their height. He dreams of glory and duty fulfilled, of a time when everything made sense and his purpose was clear. Fighting him in the dream realm means intruding on his last refuge, the only place where Hallownest still stands, and he is still the hero he once was. And when you defeat him, he's just happy someone strong visited, someone who reminded him of the old days. He's so lonely and broken that even a fight to the death is better than the crushing silence of a dead kingdom. The Mantis Lords and their dream version, the Sisters of Battle, represent honor in a world where honor mostly died with the kingdom. The Mantis tribe chose not to accept the infection, maintaining their traditions and their pride even as everything else fell apart. When you challenge the Mantis Lords and defeat them, they bow to you, acknowledging your strength. It's one of the few moments of genuine respect in the entire game. They're not your allies exactly, but they recognize you as a warrior worthy of their acknowledgement. The Sisters of Battle in the Dream Realm are even stronger, but the principle remains the same. Strength is respected, weakness is not, and honor matters even when nothing else does. This code of honor is what allowed the Mantis tribe to survive when so many others fell. They didn't compromise. They didn't accept the infection's false promises of unity. They didn't follow false kings or forgotten gods. They just maintained their traditions, guarded their territory, and refused to bend. It's a rigid way of life, harsh and unforgiving, but it worked. The Mantis tribe is one of the few groups in Hallownest that remains mostly intact by the time you arrive, and that's not an accident. Sometimes survival requires being harder than the things trying to destroy you. The Hive is another example of a community that survived through isolation and unity. The bees sealed themselves away when the infection came, sacrificing their queen to maintain the seal on their territory. It's another small tragedy in a game full of them. The queen chose to die so her children could live, and they honored that sacrifice by staying hidden and maintaining the seal even as they slowly starved and declined. When you arrive and break the seal to explore the Hive, you're essentially dooming them. But they were already doomed. The infection was always going to reach them eventually. All they bought was time, and maybe that was worth it. Maybe those extra decades or centuries of peace before the end were worth the price. Isma's Grove is one of the saddest locations in the game. Isma was one of the Pale King's knights, and she loved her king deeply. When the infection came and threatened the palace, she transformed herself into a protective grove, her body becoming plants and acidic water that would keep threats away from the White Palace. She literally gave up her physical form to protect a king who abandoned his palace anyway. Her sacrifice was meaningless because the thing she died to protect was already gone. But in her grove, you can still feel her devotion, her loyalty, her love. She never knew it was all for nothing, and maybe that's a mercy. She died believing she mattered, and sometimes that's all anyone can hope for. The kingdom's edge, the easternmost area of Hallownest, represents the boundary between civilization and wilderness. It's where Hallownest ends and the wasteland begins, a harsh cliff face battered by wind and void tendrils. The Coliseum of Fools operates here, a fighting pit where bugs battle for glory and entertainment. It's nihilistic in a way, These warriors who know the kingdom is dead, but keep fighting anyway, because fighting is all they have left. Lord Fool, the organizer, has created this space for bugs who'd rather die honorably in combat than slowly waste away from infection or despair. It's a pressure valve for hopelessness, giving directionless violence a structured outlet.
Competing in the Coliseum shows you the full range of Hallownest's inhabitants, from simple beasts to armored warriors to infected monstrosities. Everyone ends up here eventually if they survive long enough, drawn by the promise of glory or money or just the chance to fight something. The final trial, the trial of the fool, throws everything at you, including flying enemies while the floor disappears, forcing you to platform while fighting. It's brutal and chaotic and perfectly captures the energy of a place where death is expected and celebrated. Winning gives you money and the respect of the crowd, but it doesn't change anything. The kingdom is still dead. The infection still spreads. You're just slightly richer and a lot more tired. The Howling Cliffs, accessible from Kingdom's Edge, is where bugs go to die. It's a barren, windy place with few inhabitants and lots of graves. The wind howls constantly, giving the area its name, and it feels appropriately mournful. This is where Myla, the infected mining bug, likely ended up if you didn't kill her yourself. This is where warriors who couldn't accept the kingdom's fall came to find peace or oblivion. The Nailmaster motto lives here in isolation, one of 3 Nailmasters who studied under the great Nail Sage. He's lonely, but accepting of his solitude, having made peace with the fact that his art, nail combat, is probably going to die with him and his brothers. The 3 Nailmasters, Mato, Sheo, and Oro, represent different responses to the kingdom's fall. Mato isolated himself, but remains welcoming to students, hoping to pass on his knowledge before he dies. Sheo gave up the nail entirely and became a painter, channeling his warrior's discipline into art instead of violence. Oro became bitter and mercenary, charging enormous fees to teach his techniques and trusting no one. All 3 are masters of their craft, but only one found something resembling peace. Sheo's house, filled with paintings and beauty, feels like a refuge from the darkness outside. He chose to create rather than destroy, and that choice saved him from the despair that consumed so many others. The idea of creating beauty in a dying world appears throughout Hollow Knight as a form of resistance against despair. The songstress Marissa, whose spirit haunts a house in the pleasure house, sang even as the kingdom fell. The nailsmith creates perfect nail upgrades with pride and precision, taking joy in his craft. Sheo paints, Bretta writes stories. Even Elderbug maintains Dirtmouth, sweeping the streets and keeping the town tidy, despite being the only resident most of the time. These small acts of creation and maintenance are acts of defiance, proving that meaning can exist even when everything seems meaningless. Bretta's story is interesting because she's one of the few characters who changes significantly based on your actions. You rescue her from Deep Nest, where she's hiding, terrified and alone. She returns to Dirtmouth and becomes infatuated with you, writing stories where you're the dashing hero and she's the admiring observer. But if you continue proving yourself by defeating difficult bosses, her stories shift. She realizes you're not paying attention to her, that you're focused on your mission, and she transfers her affection to Zote, the self-proclaimed knight you can optionally save throughout the game.
Zote is a parody of knight tropes, all bluster and confidence with absolutely no skill to back it up. His weapon is a wooden nail that doesn't work. His armor is shellwood, basically garbage. He talks constantly about his many adventures and victories, all of which are obviously lies. But Zote, desperate for someone to admire her back, convinces herself that Zote is the hero she deserves. She builds a statue of him, dreams of him, creates an elaborate fantasy where he's everything you're not. And if you invade her dreams and defeat her vision of Zote, proving once and for all that he's worthless, she finally gives up on both of you and leaves Dirtmouth to find her own path. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is shatter someone's illusions so they can face reality.
The Grey Mourner's quest is one of the most melancholic in the game. She asks you to deliver a flower to a grave in the resting grounds. A simple task made difficult by the fact that the flower's incredibly fragile. Taking damage destroys it. Using stag stations destroys it. You have to walk carefully through some of the most dangerous areas in the game while protecting this delicate flower. And when you finally deliver it, you learn it's for her former lover, buried far from her home. The Grey Mourner and the Traitor Lord's daughter were together, despite their tribes being enemies, and when the daughter died, the mourner couldn't even properly grieve because their relationship had to remain secret. All she can do is send flowers to a grave through strangers, hoping that somehow her love will be remembered. This quest encapsulates something essential about Hollow Knight's approach to storytelling. The game is full of small, personal tragedies that have nothing to do with the main plot, but add depth and emotion to the world. Not everything is about gods and kings and infection. Sometimes it's just about two people who loved each other and couldn't be together, about loyalty that transcends death, about the desire to be remembered by someone who mattered to you. These human or bug moments make the larger tragedy more impactful because they remind you that behind every grand conflict are countless individual stories of love and loss. The character of Cloth embodies a specific kind of tragedy, the warrior who desperately wants a glorious death. She travels Hallownest looking for mighty beasts to fight, hoping to die honorably in battle rather than fade away from age or infection. She's friendly and enthusiastic, clearly a capable fighter, but there's desperation underneath her cheerfulness. She needs her death to mean something because she's terrified of dying meaninglessly. And depending on your choices, she either gets her wish, dying while protecting you in the fight against the Traitor Lord, or she survives and disappears, never finding the glorious end she sought. Neither outcome is particularly happy. Either she dies for someone else's quest, or she lives with the knowledge that she wasn't strong enough to die the way she wanted. The Traitor Lord himself is another casualty of the infection, not because he was infected, but because his tribe cast him out for accepting the infection's power. He chose strength over honor, and it cost him everything. He lives in the Queen's Gardens as an outcast, surrounded by the mantises he once led, but who now hate him for his betrayal. Fighting him reveals he's still powerful, still dangerous, but also deeply alone. His daughter's grave is in the same area, a reminder of what he lost for his choice. The game never explicitly tells you if he regrets his decision, but the environmental storytelling, a powerful warrior living in isolation near his dead child, suggests he paid a higher price than he anticipated. The Queen's Gardens themselves are beautiful and deadly, a place where nature has completely overtaken the carefully maintained paths and structures that once existed. The White Lady, the Pale King's queen and mother to all the vessels, lives here in isolation, having bound herself with roots to prevent herself from producing more children. She knows what happened in the abyss, knows the cost of her husband's plan, and her self-imposed imprisonment is her penance. When you meet her, she's serene but sad, acknowledging her role in Hallownest's tragedy while also recognizing that guilt alone doesn't fix anything. She helps you by giving you half of the King's Soul charm, but she can't undo what's been done. All she can do is refuse to participate in any more horrors.
The King's Soul charm itself is interesting because it represents the bond between the Pale King and White Lady, and when completed, it transforms into the Void Heart, the charm that lets you unite the void under your will. This transformation is symbolic. The love between the king and queen, their bond, ultimately created the void vessels through which the void could manifest. Their relationship directly led to the creation of the tool that can end the Radiance. In a roundabout way, their love is what saves or dooms Hallownest, depending on which ending you pursue. It's a complicated legacy, neither purely good nor evil, just the inevitable consequence of choices made with incomplete information and desperate hope. The Abyss Shriek ability, your final Scream upgrade, requires you to fully confront your origins. You have to return to the Abyss, go to your birthplace, and essentially accept what you are. You're not special. You're not chosen. You're just one of thousands who happened to survive when the others didn't. But that survival matters because it gave you the chance to end this. The ability itself is powerful, a devastating area of effect scream that embodies void energy. It's your siblings' rage and pain given form, channeled through you as the last vessel capable of action. Every time you use it, you're weaponizing the tragedy of the Abyss, turning pointless death into purposeful destruction. The game's achievement system even acknowledges the darkness of Hallownest's story. Many achievements have somber or ironic names that reflect the tragedy you're experiencing. Passing of the Age for defeating the Radiance, Sealed Siblings for the ending where you and the Hollow Knight are sealed together, Delicate Flower for completing the Grey Mourner's quest. These aren't triumphant declarations of victory. They're quiet acknowledgments of what was lost and what you had to do to move forward. Even in success, there's mourning. The speedrunning community has embraced Hollow Knight, specifically because of how well the game's mechanics support skilled play. The movement is precise, the combat is fair. The shortcuts reward knowledge of the world's layout. Watching someone complete the game in under an hour after spending dozens of hours on your first playthrough really drives home how much the game respects player skill and learning. You start as a confused wanderer who dies to basic enemies, and through practice and persistence, you become a void-powered godslayer who can navigate Hallownest's dangers with ease. That progression feels earned because the game never changes the rules. It's always been fair. You just got better. But here's what makes Hollow Knight truly special as a masterpiece. It's not just that it does one thing exceptionally well. It's that it does everything well and makes all those elements work together in service of a cohesive vision. The difficulty reinforces the themes about perseverance. The art style makes the world feel alien but approachable. The music creates atmosphere without overwhelming. The environmental storytelling rewards exploration. The combat feels good moment to moment. The movement is fluid and responsive. The story respects your intelligence. The characters feel real. The world feels lived in. Nothing is wasted. Nothing feels arbitrary.
every element supports every other element, creating an experience that's greater than the sum of its parts.
This kind of cohesion is rare in any medium, but especially in games, where different teams often work on different systems with varying levels of communication. Team Cherry's small size became an advantage here because the same people were making all the major decisions, ensuring everything fit together properly. There was no one pulling in different directions, no corporate mandates forcing changes, no committee designing by consensus. Just 3 people with a vision and the skill to execute it, taking as long as necessary to get it right. And they did get it right. Hollow Knight has sold millions of copies, inspired countless fan works, spawned an entire genre of copycat games, and remains one of the most discussed and analyzed games years after release. The fact that people are still finding new details and creating new theories speaks to the depth of what Team Cherry created. This isn't a game you finish and forget. It's a game you live with, think about, return to. It becomes part of your gaming DNA, the standard against which other games are measured. The announcement of Silksong, the sequel following Hornet, was met with almost unprecedented excitement, precisely because people trust Team Cherry to deliver another masterpiece. They proved with Hollow Knight that they understand how to craft meaningful experiences, and fans are willing to wait however long it takes for them to do it again. That trust is earned, not given, and it comes from respecting your audience enough to give them something substantial, something that treats them like thinking, feeling people, rather than just consumers. So when we talk about why Hollow Knight is a masterpiece, we're talking about more than just good gameplay or pretty art or interesting lore. We're talking about a complete artistic vision executed with skill and passion. A game that understands what it wants to say and says it clearly without compromise. We're talking about respect for the player's intelligence and time. We're talking about the courage to let things be sad without rushing to comfort. We're talking about the confidence to trust ambiguity over exposition. We're talking about craft at the highest level. Hollow Knight is a masterpiece because it reminds us what games can be when creators are given the freedom to follow their vision without interference. It's a masterpiece because it proves that small teams can compete with massive studios if they focus on quality over quantity. It's a masterpiece because it treats games as a legitimate artistic medium capable of complex storytelling and emotional depth. It's a masterpiece because it made you care about a silent bug wandering through a dead kingdom, made you invest emotionally in NPCs you might only talk to once, made you think about sacrifice and duty and the cost of trying to control things beyond our understanding.
But most of all, Hollow Knight is a masterpiece because it sticks with you. Long after you've finished it, long after you've explored every corner and defeated every boss and unlocked every ending, it stays in your mind. You think about Arthur and the Abyss. You wonder what happened to Quirrel. You feel sad when you remember the Hollow Knight stabbing itself, desperately trying to maintain a seal that was always going to fail. You carry these moments and characters with you, and that's the mark of truly great art. It changes you slightly, adds something to who you are, makes you see the world a little differently. That's why we're here tonight, talking about this game years after it came out. That's why people create elaborate lore videos and detailed analyses and passionate defenses of their interpretations. That's why Hollow Knight matters, not just as a game, though it's an excellent game, but as a piece of art that used the interactive medium to create something meaningful, something that couldn't exist in any other form. So whether you defeated the Radiance or became the new seal, whether you embraced the void or completed every journal entry, whether you cried at Quirrel's nail by the lake or felt nothing, Hollow Knight gave you something real. It gave you a journey through darkness that meant something. Characters who felt alive despite being fictional bugs, and a world that felt like it mattered even though it was already doomed. And that's what masterpieces do. They make us feel things we didn't expect to feel. They make us think about things we wouldn't normally consider. They stay with us long after the experience ends, becoming part of our internal landscape of meaningful moments and powerful stories. Hollow Knight earned that status through craft and vision and respect for its audience, and it will be remembered long after lesser games are forgotten. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Hallownest tonight. I hope you found something worth carrying with you, whether that's a new appreciation for the game's depth, a different perspective on its themes, or just a renewed desire to return to that melancholic kingdom one more time. Sleep well, and may your dreams be free of infection.